Hello. Welcome back to another episode of Umbrella Therapy, or welcome for the first time. This is your first time listening. This episode is another wonderful episode. I'm going to say that probably every time because that's how I feel about each episode. I'm connecting with people that I'm connected to and feel passionate about what they're bringing. So it feels that way after everyone. So this episode, we talked about lots of different things. Sean is a outdoor therapist, supervisor for psychotherapists in training and in professional practice. And he also trains psychotherapists who want to take their practice outdoors. And in this episode, we talked about outdoor therapy and the kind of expansive nature of that and how it brings together so many different things and how nature can often be like a third therapist who's holding space and being there with us and offers opportunity for metaphors and all that kind of stuff and how it can be made so accessible for so many different people depending on what they're bringing. We can walk, we can sit. There's so many different things that we can do when we're outdoors. We talked about some of the assumptions that are made when people are thinking about the outdoor therapy and Sean's journey into finding becoming a therapist and how that was a combination of meaning and purpose and connection and confidence in himself and like coming home. And so you'll hear about that. I really hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did. And yeah, if you want to hear from Sean more, connect with him, I've got all the links in the bio. Try to get more professional with saying that. And the cringiest thing to share, if you don't mind liking this video or subscribing to YouTube if you're listening on YouTube, or leaving that cringy 5-star review. I never did think I would say that at the start of these episodes. And if you listen to my previous podcast, you would never have found me saying that. This is the first time. But I do really want to meet people through this podcast and allow people to hear the messages that are being shared. So I guess I have to get used to saying those kind of professional things that I was thinking, why do people keep saying that? And I guess it's just all the time. The more you say it, hopefully, the more people will recognize the importance of that and how it really does make a big difference for people learning about the podcast and hearing about it. And it prevents maybe creatives being kind of clickbaity in their titles to reach more people. If just people kind of circulate podcasts, share it with people that you know might benefit from listening to it, all that kind of stuff. Okay, I'll stop there. Enjoy. Yeah, like I was just sharing that I started the podcast with the intention of connection. So
Mm-hmm.
I noticed within me a kind of an urge to connect with other therapists in a different way
Mm-hmm.
and hear their thoughts and really connect and form bonds and friendships but out with the kind of peer supervision because I felt like a lot of the conversations I was having were really valuable and could really offer other people of
Yeah.
value, whether that was other therapists or anyone, because there's such a vulnerability that we can get to experience as therapists, the journeys that we've all been on kind of allows us to connect and in a depth. Like for example, when we first met, we were kind of like right in there with our
Mm-hmm.
experience and
Yeah.
in a really organic, natural way,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
a bond kind of happened. So
Mm-hmm.
all that to say, thank you for coming on the
All right.
podcast.
Pleasure. Yeah.
Um, and like I mentioned, I really kind of bookend the podcast with a couple of similar questions for each person. And
Mm-hmm.
then in the midst of the podcast, it'll be all kind of unique themes
Yeah.
to you and we can go wherever you want to go.
Yeah. That's good.
So yeah, do you want to share a wee bit about your therapy journey and how you got to where you are today?
Okay. So yeah, I mean, there's a short version and a sort of long version, and I'm not quite sure which one is the most fitting, but I'll try and sort of summarize. So I've been a therapist for what I think, I started my training in 2016. Started my private practice in 2018. Um, Yeah, but I suppose the journey to becoming a therapist is the bit that I think it's valuable to share. Not because it's my story, but I think it's a story that is honest and like people connect with. So ultimately, it's a story of feeling unsatisfied in various areas in my life and having loads of jobs and being like, I don't like this one, or academic stuff not really landing for me. Just like I enjoyed school because I'm a social creature and I like to chat and like to, so I went to uni, didn't like it, dropped at uni, got a job, didn't like that, went back to uni. And that pattern kind of pretty much continued from my 18 till I was in my late 20s, like this seasons of change thing all the time, like jobs, girlfriends, moving house, all that, constant. So yeah, therapy was like a sort of idea I'd had a few times, like, oh, that'd be really interesting. Like I really like people, like I'm really fascinated with people, like I'm sort of inquisitive as a person, you know. So all this was still there. But I think on some level I thought, well, I can't do that because you probably need some sort of degree or, you know. But the sort of build up of like dissatisfaction and disenchantment with like my life, you know, like just feeling really to the point that, you know, in my probably my late 20s, things were at their most difficult phase. Like I was actively using drugs, I was gambling quite a lot, I was not in a good space. And that was a sort of a thing that you know, it escalated over time. It wasn't a sudden thing, but I think I was 29 and I sort of things came ahead and yeah, it wasn't a great time. And I think I knew then that I needed to do something different. There needed to be some sort of change. And I think I realized that that was to come from me. I would need to be the master of that somehow. Um, yeah, so met Ashley, who's my now wife, at a time where I was probably kind of unhappy. It's when we met. Without going into all Ashley's whole life story, I think Ashley was in a similar space when we met. We both kind of met each other at a time where we weren't feeling great about a lot of things in our life, you know. So we became a sort of cheerleader for each other, and you know that was a really life enriching thing. And so moved to Glasgow, had a few different jobs again. The pattern still continued, but I was happier, you know. But that sort of, yeah, it was a habitual thing. Like, I'm bored, I'm doing something else. I don't like this, I've quit the job, you know. And then in 2016, I was on a family holiday in France visiting my brother. I had a job working for a third sector organisation. The job itself was fine, you know. I had no strong feelings either way. It was fine. But on the holiday, they kept phoning me to ask me things about where I'd left a folder, and I just got really pissed off about the whole thing. And I had this sort of moment of like, I'd not seen my brother for a couple of years at that point, and I was like, this job that I don't even care about is ruining my holiday, and I just got really ticked off about it. And then on that holiday, I started with like really sketchy Wi-Fi. I started looking for like counselling courses. I just had this thing. I'm going to revisit that idea I'd had before. So I looked and kind of done a bit of that, and I found a couple of night classes, and I tried to apply for them on the holiday. Long story, well, it's now a long story, but like came back for the holiday. The night classes were full, if I remember correctly. There was something happened, but it wasn't going to quite work. But then I'd found the HNC at South Lanarkshire College, and I applied for it. They were like, we're full. I was like, oh, I was going back to work. First day back at work, my manager kind of shouted at me about something. There was a whole thing. I texted Ashley just saying, oh, so and so's been a pain in the arse again, you know, this kind of thing. And Ashley was like, just quit, come on, you can do it. And I was like, I know, like I will, like because I'd quit jobs before, it didn't feel like a big deal in a sense. But I was actually like, no, I think I bloody will just quit. That's it. That's it. I put on my little rucksack and I just basically walked out. And then that was that. Then I was like, oh, I'm going to go and do that counselling course. Oh shit, there's no places left. I've not thought this through. And a sort of series of events over the next 72 hours basically meant South Lanarkshire College were like, there's a space available if you can get here pronto for an interview. Like I think it was the next day or later that day. I did, got the space, and that was it.
Ah,
So it's like all these sort of like things just so it's like a kind of like like a long backlog of stuff, but it's just everything in that moment seemed to be in flow. Things just clicked.
yes.
I think intuitively, uh, I knew this was the right thing. I didn't know how I knew that because sometimes we don't. We need to know. We don't need to analyze it. But I just knew. Started that course, and it was like I don't know how I can describe it, but it felt like finally all these things I'd known I was good at, all these things I wanted to be doing, all this thing about like what it and meant something to me, like doing something worthwhile, being creative, working for myself, all this stuff. Just it's like it all just simultaneously just came to fruition, And obviously it wasn't all, but it felt like that. It felt like, oh, I am home. It was that kind of thing. And it felt like probably the most significant thing in my life at that point was finding the thing I wanted to do. And in that moment, it's like that set off this other sort of chain of events, which was like being able to sort of forgive my former self for like some of the stuff I'd done, being able to like offer sort of sympathy and empathy to Sean of 10 years ago rather than saying he was an idiot. You know, it was all this stuff and it was incredible. And even now when I talk about it, I'm feeling it. Like when I talk about it, I get like shivers because it was such yeah, it was one of those, it was just, everything just felt right. Like from like, from the tips of my toes almost, it was like, I just knew this. And then since then, it's not to say my life has been plain sailing, but feeling like I am, it's a big thing about self-worth, clearly, but feeling like really like I'm doing something I really care about. I am good at it, and I feel comfortable saying that, and I'm passionate about it. And
Mhm.
it's like this is like a life's work kind of thing, and I love it. And it's like so that's like that's the sort of sequence of events that led me to becoming or to training, certainly as a therapist.
That's a
Um,
beautiful summary. And just before we go on, I recently designed a t-shirt and I'm wearing it just now and it
yeah.
says the journey home
Oh
to
man,
yourself.
yeah,
The journey home to yourself. And I just
cool,
think
yeah.
that's so if anyone is listening who knows me, that exact description of everything coming together was it mirrors my experience. And hearing you say that it's kind of wrapped up with meaning and an anchoring and a journey to come back to yourself, but also to connect with other people. And maybe that seeking of connection that you were doing previously of trying to find the right job
Mm-hmm.
or maybe distraction with the gambling and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then finding your partner and having her support and her anchoring and
Mm-hmm.
encouragement at the same time. And I also heard you say like you were on holiday with your brother, right? And sometimes we need a wee bit space away from our normal routine, whether that's just like even a day, a day trip or a
Mm-hmm.
a time in nature, which we'll definitely come on to. But if
Mm-hmm.
you have like a pause in a space that feels grounding in some ways, it can give you just a wee bit of a break to kind of discover or check in with your true, like you just described, intuitive self and be like, what feels right for me right
Yeah.
now? Or not even what feels right, because that's sometimes a really tough question to figure out, but you kind of know intuitively what doesn't feel right. And you
Yeah.
maybe aren't listening to that
Mm-hmm.
kind of phone that's ringing that's like something is not quite right. You're maybe choosing
Mm-hmm.
for whatever reason not to answer it. Um, a really powerful story to start us. And that takes us a wee bit on to the next phase. So once
Mm-hmm.
you, maybe even before you qualified, of
Mm-hmm.
starting that journey into moving towards outdoor therapy, did you have a kind of placement experience that allowed you to recognize what therapy could look like and the diversity of the settings that you could practice, or what was the kind of teeing off point for different types of therapy?
So when I did my HNC, well, I suppose a bit backwards context is, yeah, like I'd always wanted to work outdoors even before I'd identified I wanted to be a therapist. This was a sort of like an itch that I was always
Mm,
trying to scratch. Like I
okay.
start one of the many uni courses I started was like a conservation course and it would be all working outside with historic Scotland. I was like, oh, that'll be cool. Didn't finish it. Got bored. Um, I applied for a job with the Venture Trust. Oh, that'll be outside. So there's all these different things that were always years previously. I was applied for to the rural college, Scottish, what it was called, SRUC, to do like a forestry course. So there's all these sort of moments where I was like, oh, I know being outside is a thing that's important to me. How do I do that? So it was kind of there. But so when I started my HNC, we had to do like a kind of bit, like a bit like, who are you and why are you here and what do you want to do? And the lecturer was really good at sort of giving us space to like daydream with that stuff, and it was really nice. And I was like, I don't really know, but I think I want to work outdoors with people. And the lecturer was like, oh, cool, that sounds interesting. And that was kind of it. Fast forward to my HND, I said that to the lecturer in my HND who basically told me I was being silly and also unethical. And then, there was layers of judgment that made me a bit uncomfortable. And on some level, I think I went, bollocks to that, I'll do this.
Mhm.
So there was like a bit of like a rebellion. But yeah, so when I had my placement, there was no opportunity to do anything other than the sort of sitting in a room with a client, really. But simultaneously, I was doing support work, and the guy I was supporting had diabetes and Alzheimer's. So as a way of managing both, though not managing, but dealing with that stuff, a lot of time was spent going for walks around the local park and then becoming really familiar with this space and then realizing, stuff that I already knew, but realizing, there's a great benefit to this. So it just almost, again, it's another example of when things just sort of aligned. So I was like, at the point of starting my private practice, I'd already decided I was going to be working outdoors. Didn't know how that would look, what that would mean, but I knew it. That's going to happen. And the people who were saying no, sometimes I did want to be like, oh, get lost, I'll do what I want, kind of thing. But also I was just like, it's just noise, it's distraction, it doesn't matter. Like, so I had this sort of, it wasn't even it doesn't feel like it was a focus. It was just like a knowing. It was like, of course I'm going to do that. Like, there's no doubt that I'll do that. So I started my private practice, advertised it straight away, had my
Yeah,
first
could you
outdoor
share a
client.
wee bit about that? Because that really inspired me. Just you told me months ago that was exactly what you did as soon as you qualified, and I thought you can do
Hmm.
that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a part of me or my character that doesn't like being told what to do,
Mhm.
and I know that, and I like that about myself. I can temper it sometimes, but I like that I'm like sure of my own mind and quite like when it's something I care about or I'm passionate about, I'm quite driven with it. So that idea to start my private practice was the fact I was kind of told, oh, you need to, get some hours under your belt. And I remember questioning all that, going, well, what are we training for? Like, we're doing this training, we're doing a placement. So are we saying that that's not valid? Like, are we saying that, like, oh, you're still not ready? You still need to do some free work for some. I don't know, it just felt a bit like counterintuitive. And I think I was like, well, I'm confident enough in my work, but I'm also self-aware enough that if I think I'm not managing, I will feel fine to reassess. So I think there's essentially, of course I can do that. Um, so yeah, and I did. I set up my private practice. I don't remember the exact timeline, but it was pretty much as soon as I qualified.
Yeah.
I mean, I know I had my website up and done in about 24 hours. Like deciding, I just was like, right, how do you get a website? And again, it's like that thing when I get on it as sort of spacey singular focus. I just like, right, I'll just do it. There's no doubts creep in when I'm like that.
Yeah.
So it's like, so yeah, and then I had my first outdoor client pretty quickly. And again, we'll probably touch on that a bit, but like I think I felt intuitively and a knowing that this will be fine. And if I'm doing it and it doesn't feel okay, I will look at that. I'm not going to be unethical. I'm not going to be blasé. I'll really be reflective about that. But the idea of holding space for someone in a non-clinical environment felt okay and felt comfortable. And I
Yeah.
think that was kind of what led me to that point.
And before we kind of go into like the beautiful aspects of outdoor therapy and what it really, really is, I think
Hmm.
it's really nice to kind of touch back on before I actually ask that question, just quickly returning to what you were sharing about as soon as you qualified and having a website up for 24 hours after. I remember hearing that and it was so grounding for me. Like it was such a powerful story to hear at a time where I was still studying and
Hmm.
exploring what I wanted to do. You were the
Hmm.
first person that kind of almost gave me permission to tune into what I really wanted. And that idea that it doesn't have to be the way that everyone was telling me it had to be. And so I just wanted to kind of really highlight that in case there's any
Hmm.
students of or any kind of therapist in training right now, kind of exploring the options and hearing about the expansive nature of what therapy can be like for you, your own individual life, and having autonomy and agency and all that kind
Hmm.
of stuff. But before we kind of go on to what your practice looks like, do you
Hmm.
want to kind of deepen into the assumptions about outdoor therapy? So you mentioned some of your
Yeah.
teachers and the kind of assumptions that they might have had without maybe having experience of outdoor therapy. What over the years, what is the kind of assumptions people have made about your work?
Well, I think, now where are we, 2024? I think it's definitely more kind of common for people to do what most people call walk and talk, right? We'll get into that, but it's much more accepted, but it's still not, you know, it's still viewed with some suspicion, some sort of trepidation, some sort of anxiety around safety. All these are obviously really relevant things. Client safety is paramount, but it's like I sometimes think it's overcomplicating something. You know, the fear or the sort of the view people might have about that is an overcomplication. And I think, you know, in my experience, that particular lecturer I'm talking about, that's not an isolated incident. That was something I still come up against. You know, I was on a sort of course not too long ago, and there was a person on the course who's a vastly experienced therapist, you know, 25 years plus or something. But they basically poo-pooed my whole practice because they said, you know, there's not enough evidence to support that that's okay. And we started getting into a sort of a candid discussion about like, well, what, you know, why, why is it not okay? Like, what's your, no, it wasn't a debate, but it's just like, okay, well, what's your rationale for saying that doesn't work? What's that based on? And I think that's what, you know, I feel like I come up against that quite a lot. I used to feel like it was something I had to defend. I don't really care now. I'm just like it's fine. Just, but I feel like that's a sort of our view of therapy is very much shaped by again a certain model that we are shown from you know exposure to TV, film, our own experiences of therapy. That it's like it's kind of a clinical model, and it's a model which is, if we think about power as a big part of that model, whether it's inherent or felt or whatever, you're going into the therapist's office with all the certificates on the wall and all that stuff. So I think it all plays into this idea of like power and sort of power balance. So I think the idea of working outdoors for some therapists might feel like, oh shit, like on some level, I, me and the client will like I won't have control over that situation. So that makes me a bit anxious about it. So therefore, I don't think it's safe, which again makes sense in some sense. But so yeah, I think I still hear it quite often, you know, from people, you know, like not just questions like how does that work, but like, oh, is that okay to do that? And like I had a situation recently where yeah, someone I know was talking to one of their lecturers about it. You know, that's what I want to do in the lecturer. A different lecturer at a different institution had the same reaction as my lecturer back in 2017. We just go, oh, I mean, that's outrageous. That's silly. That's dangerous. So yeah, I think there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of assumptions made, but I think a lot of those assumptions come from a place of fear, perceived safety. So I try to kind of treat them as sort of a bit of noise, you know, and just kind of. I don't feel like I need to defend what I do. I think at some point I did feel voraciously like I had to defend it. But I'm just like, you do you, I'll do me. Let's just, you know,
And
So yeah.
you know, the reason I asked you that question is because I've experienced the same.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you've touched on lots of different things there that I could kind of expand on. One of them really, really connect with is that actually the assumptions are where the work begins, right? So if we think about someone who has a preconceived idea of being in nature, it's
Mm-hmm.
like really exploring their relationship with nature and where that kind of stems from. The best example I could give is exercise. So if we're thinking
Mm-hmm.
about when you're in nature and you're walking,
Mm-hmm.
for many of us, it can be a really positive experience, but others it can be a really negative experience, and that can be based on our past experiences. So imagine us being, it can have connections with physical activity and exercise and our relationship with our body,
Mm-hmm.
being seen by other people, and it can have all these kind of barriers that maybe unconsciously or consciously we're carrying. And
Mm-hmm.
so our relationship with nature can bring up that. If we're outdoors, it can be that we feel more exposed, whether that's a client or a therapist, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and it can bring up different things about our body and our relationship with nature. But on the opposite scale, the experience of being nature can be so expansive, so connected,
Mm-hmm.
and so diverse. You know, you can have all sorts of settings that we explored, and I definitely can let you explore this further because you have more insight. But that we can walk, we can sit, we can be in a forest, we can be in a park, we can walk up a hill, we can be by the coast. There's such a variety, and all those varieties connect with the type of session you're working in as well. Like if you're having a
Mm-hmm.
really intense session where there's lots of emotion kicking around. We can use the metaphors of what we're around. There's so much. And I have really, really thought about this in depth, that nature is like having another therapist there,
Oh
that
yeah.
nature is someone else holding the space, holding that
Mm-hmm.
connection for us.
Mm-hmm.
They're there witnessing us and being there with us in all of our feelings, all of our experiences. It's like a yeah, it's like a source of
Mm-hmm.
connection
Yeah.
alongside the work. And so I really wanted to ask you that question around assumptions, because I think it prevents people having such a beautiful, expansive experience. It's not to say that that's for everyone,
Mm-hmm.
but in my personal and professional life, have probably had the most connective experiences outdoors,
Yeah.
and the most vulnerable, kind of life-lasting memories with
Mm-hmm.
clients and with friends and with family outside. So yeah, what do you feel when you're working outdoors, and what are the kind of things that come to mind when you think about the benefits of taking your practice outdoors?
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing I made a little note in my notepad when you said, because I wanted to touch on, is this idea of nature being almost like a co-therapist, and that's something I have thought quite a bit about. There's something about yeah, there's something about what nature means to the client and the therapist, and also like how there's a sense of being held, and a sense of um, there's a sense of unconditional positive regard almost in nature. Like there's no conditional relationship there. It's like it just is. So there's something about that that feels really beautiful. And actually, for what the example I often use or I often think about is if it starts raining, you and the client are both going to get wet, right? Like there's something about that that's quite democratic. There's something about that that's quite equalizing. So I think nature sort of facilitates these moments that actually it's not to say that you will have a better connection with a client just because you're outdoors, but there's something about the environment not being yours. It's not your office, not your space, that dissolves a lot of that hierarchy, and I think that's a really powerful thing. Like, and with clients, like even something as simple as like, which way will we go when we get to this bit? You might get choices where you take the sort of articulation of your session in an office, but actually being able to choose where you move through the environment or how you move through the environment. Do you want to climb over that tree stump? All of that, I think is just it adds so much potentially. Like we say, it's not necessarily for everyone, and some people might not view it in that way. But there's definitely a sense of like there's a richness there, and I think it is. It's like having a sort of three people in that relationship rather than the two, and I think that's really great, and I love it. So I think for me, what I see as the benefits is that is a really apparent one for me. I think the sense of space, and and the sense of time, how we relate to the space and time, is impacted. Um, I mean, even in encountering our discomfort in a more direct way, like oh Christ, it's raining, or like it's really cold today.
Mhm.
And obviously there's decisions and practical things to consider, but actually being able to like encounter our edges, like bump up against our edges of comfort. I think that's like, and to do that with someone, so sort of almost like not allowing, but facilitating that, and to sort of be there for the client while they encounter their discomfort in a really direct way. Because actually, some people don't mind getting wet. In simple terms, some people can't stand the rain. So it's like that. Even that is like can be a, a catalyst for something, and so that the fact that it's an uncontrolled environment, the fact that there are so many variables, it just feels more alive. It feels like we're the work we're doing is more immediate, I think, is what I feel. Um, and I have clients who work solely indoors or solely on Zoom, and I still think those sessions are really rich and as worthwhile. It's not about one is better than another, but I notice when I'm outdoors with clients, it feels like something is different. And I think that big difference is the immediacy of the work, but also the shared experience. The like, because there's all this sort of cliched stuff about you going to a therapist office and they've got a bigger chair than you, or
Mhm.
they've got a fancy armchair and you've got a wee one. Like,
Mhm.
there's all this stuff about power and safety and all that, but when we're outdoors together, it just feels like that's all gone.
Yeah.
Um, by and large, obviously there'll still be some stuff, and I think for me that's the main hook for me doing it. I mean, I could talk all day about this stuff clearly, but that's the sort of the thing that I hold on to the most. I think that this is why it works.
Yeah, it feels genuine and that you're two humans experiencing
Mm-hmm.
the therapeutic journey together. And like you said, if it's raining or one of you is out of breath, or,
Mm-hmm.
there's something just like that humanizes therapists in some ways that, and we don't have as much of a place to hide. Everyone has a different relationship with self-disclosure and being your authentic self. The way that I practice is I'm my full self as a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
So I am me, but I imagine that well, I've experienced, not even just I imagine, when I'm moving, more of
Mm-hmm.
me comes out, more
Mm,
of
yeah.
my relationship with like a jumping over something or dodging something. Like your whole body is experiencing.
Yeah.
And I think that for me, it's definitely everything you described. And then I know you're going to agree with this, is like using your body, experiencing the senses and the mind body connection and processing how you're feeling while moving. Like most people who enjoy walking with someone, whether that's a friend or a family member, you'll remember conversations you've had, or the
Mm-hmm.
ways that you've been able to move into vulnerability in a different way than when you're sitting on the couch or being in your
Mm-hmm.
house. Or there's a movement, that element to vulnerability, I feel, and deep connection that isn't fully there with us when we're stagnant. And I also wanted to share as well, when you were describing having clients indoors and out,
Mm-hmm.
I have began to do a bit of a hybrid with clients, and it's
Mm, yeah.
offered such a richness, because then
Mm-hmm.
some days we'll meet in person and the next day we'll be on the phone, and then on Zoom, and it's like a variety
Yeah.
of depth and connection, and depending on what's going on for us that week, how much capacity we have for a big outdoor session or a
Mm-hmm.
small outdoor session, depending on what we want to create. But I've also noticed within me, especially going through the winter, that I've discovered that I have choice in that what I offer. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
fully tune in with my ability to make that choice before. I was kind of offering as much as I could for others. And I was
Mm-hmm.
thinking, actually, maybe in the winter, I'll hold back some of my in-person stuff and do
Mm-hmm.
like a 70-30 split where I'm
Mm-hmm.
doing more online work, and then move as we come into spring and summer, move into more of a equal split, or maybe even more in outdoors. But just a lovely variety that can really meet each of us where we're at, not
Mm-hmm.
just clients, but us as therapists, and
Yeah.
connecting with where we're at on a given day.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really exciting place to be, to have options, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that blended thing is that's something I tell all the like sort of people who approach me for for a consultation with the view about coming working together. I explain that to everyone that if you decide you want to work outdoors, that's not a sort of set in stone thing. We can mix it up, and since I moved to my new office in like October, that's in Pollock Park. So what that means is mid-session, if somebody's like feeling stuck, for example, we can get up and walk out and go up into the woods.
Mhm.
And it's just that's really cool to be able to respond to that so immediately. So like it's bringing some of that immediacy to the sort of static session, because we can get up and get out of here, and that's really cool. But I think the blended model is something that a lot of clients seem to really favour at the moment. I think there's a real desire because there's something about that as well. I'll say to clients, you don't need to tell me in advance. Like if we're agreeing we're meeting at my office, we'll meet at my office, but you could literally text me 5 minutes before and say, "Can we meet at the gate?" and we'll just go for a walk, and that's fine. It's different if it's a Zoom thing because there's a bit more of a timetable and thing. But yeah, so I think that allows the client to have again more agency and more autonomy, more choice, which potentially is a really big deal for them. So and it really enhances the therapeutic relationship.
So amazing to put into practice. What do you want right now?
Hmm.
Tune into
Yeah.
what your body and your
Hmm.
mind wants. And you've shared before that like in session you can decide if you want to have a wee seat, or like
Hmm.
it's so adaptable. And
Hmm.
I know that we could talk so much about that. I kind of we can always come back if you ever want
Yeah.
to discuss and start up your own again, or come back on this
Hmm.
podcast. I'd love to talk to you. And we actually said we might do an outdoor.
Yeah, I think we
I
did
think
do that.
I
I'd
think
say
that
that,
would
yeah.
be a lovely like
Perfect kill, yeah.
hybrid
Hmm.
approach.
Hmm.
Um, but just kind of coming to the last couple of questions I wanted to ask you about some of the barriers. So we're both, you mentioned you moved to Glasgow. I didn't actually know where you grew up.
Falkirk.
Falkirk. I did know that. I remember it now you
Mm.
shared. So both growing up in Scotland and maybe having different experiences in that, but we still have a kind of a culture, like a big overarching culture that we've absorbed, and maybe in different ways,
Mhm.
especially because we're maybe coming back different genders and all that kind of stuff. I wondered if there is any kind of barriers or stigmas or yeah, like interpretations of therapy that you had to kind of work through becoming a therapist, or still now hearing people say, I would love to go to therapy, but I think this about it. Or do
Mm.
you still come up against that type of stuff, or had you in the past come up against that?
I mean, broadly speaking, like I mean, well, if I look at the first course I did, the HNC, there was what, 20, 22, 23 of us in the course, there was three males. So that's not a stereotype or that's not a bias. That's just a fact. That's how many males there are in the course. But that tells us something on some level about, you know, the sort of gendering a job feels like that's a dying thing, which is good. But it feels like there's that's still alive. It's still there somehow. There are jobs that are seen as probably more male jobs and jobs that are seen as more female jobs, which obviously isn't right. But yeah, so I feel like there was at the start there was an awareness of like, oh, I'm in the minority here. Um, but in terms of like, coming up against that sort of stuff, it does feel like in some ways that stuff's getting better or changing.
Hmm.
Um, but I think ultimately there are people who are suspicious and resistant to the idea of therapy. And it's not necessarily that more of them are male or more are female, but I think there is still, and there's a cultural thing there as well, isn't there? Like if you look at Scotland as a sort of whole, in a lot of ways we are world leaders in, sort of the way Scotland is run as a country. Like it makes you feel really good about what we're doing. But if we look at like sort of some of this stuff, sort of historical stuff about like how we act and how we sort of inhabit space and like it's there's a thing about like just get on with it, be toughen up. There's all these sort of things that are still exist in people and in culture. So I think for me it feels like there's two different things going on. There is a resistance to therapy, but I am also kind of aware that that's not my job to change that. And I think at some point in time, I did think, oh, I need to be like the poster child for therapy or something, or like, banging the drum about therapy all the time. And I think there's validity in that.
Sure.
And there's obviously real barriers to engaging with therapy. And some of those barriers are socioeconomic barriers, some of them are cultural, some are family norms. There's all sorts of barriers. But as a therapist, I think one of the most effective ways that we have this sort of newer generation of therapists to dissolve some of that stuff is to be ourselves and
Hmm.
to show ourselves as therapists rather than trying to be this sort of carbon copy, sort of archetype therapist. It's like, no, I'm a therapist, but I've still not got half my shit figured out. I still um, do things that are counterintuitive. I still am reactive sometimes. I'm still, it's all of that. So I think that's my sort of that's not a planned sort of contrived way that I'm doing it. It's just that's what's happening. But I've noticed the more of myself I show in, whether it's on Instagram or my training courses or or in terms of self-disclosure, the more of that I show, the more willing I am to be out there.
Hmm.
I think the better people will relate to therapists as a whole. And it's like I don't think that's my job, but I
Yeah.
think people, this new generation of therapists that are coming through, that are kind of going, well, let's just smash all this up and start again a little bit. Like
Yeah.
because it's basically, this the world of therapy is a strange one because it's there are more female therapists historically, but the therapists who are in positions of power and authority are more male. So it's this weird thing again, but it's like,
Ulcers and yep.
yeah. So I think as a male, I don't think I have an extra responsibility necessarily, but I'm aware that I'm in the minority. But yeah, I think it's just a
Yeah.
case of like
Mm.
doing doing the work and like being myself in the work rather than being a
Yeah.
sort of version of a therapist that I think is the right way to be a therapist, because if I think of therapy as an extension of myself rather than a mask I'm putting on. So it's just like, just keep doing it. And I think people I've spoke to echo that. So there's more people putting themselves out there and sort of showing themselves as therapists. And I think it's
Yeah,
really refreshing.
so refreshing. And you know, I really love that description of we we can let go of the responsibility of needing to change and challenge, but being ourselves is a challenge in and of itself. You know, actually
Yeah.
showing up authentically
Hmm.
and genuinely, I think is a big relief because, well, kind of how I grew up in a kind of working class environment with therapy wasn't financially viable, but also there was a
Hmm.
lot of stigma around who
Hmm.
therapy was for and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And going into therapy, I almost felt like I had a responsibility to highlight that it was for everyone and kind of take on more than I
Hmm.
probably could. And
Hmm.
also, well, all of that kind of stuff. But actually, what a relief to know that you're making change by being yourself. You know, you don't always have to be doing. I think we
Yeah.
often, when we get to a place of maybe that's different from how we grew up, we
Hmm.
still want to kind of keep going and doing and taking on
Hmm.
those responsibilities can be quite exhausting sometimes.
Hmm.
And I think that that's a really beautiful point to think about you creating space for you to be your full self, whether that's online and how you show up or it's in session,
Hmm.
um, is making waves of change. You know, that it's, I just feel like that really balances the load sometimes because I feel like I have
Yeah.
taken on the responsibility in different parts of my life that
Hmm.
feels a wee bit unsustainable and not my role. So I think I kind of, yeah, I needed to hear that,
Hmm.
what you just shared there. Um, and kind of quickly touching on something that I never actually asked you about, so feel free not
Hmm.
to explore
Hmm.
this. But when you were mentioning about being your full self and kind of this new generation of therapists, I wonder if you've worked with young people in the past. I don't know what your
Hmm.
caseload age is at the moment, but have you noticed, because I definitely have, this different ability for the maybe to do with the internet age and the access to information, the
Hmm.
insight that people now bring to therapy, and I've just the balance of that, the balance of coming in with a lot of insight and information and understanding,
Hmm.
potentially overwhelmingly so, and
Hmm.
trying to navigate yourself through all of that
Hmm.
information and find out what resonates with you as an individual, versus coming in with maybe not a lot of that and kind of
Hmm.
unpacking a lot of it in the moment as you go. I just wonder, it probably isn't even an age thing. It's probably an access to information and also how you've been brought up and your culture and
Hmm.
your family stuff. And but just curious about if you've noticed a difference with age and how that impacts.
No, I mean, I think that, yeah, you're touching on something there that feels like, yeah, like that. I think, if, again, massive generalizations I'm making here to illustrate a point, but I think if we think of like maybe people of my parents' generation, for example, they would have seen, in some senses, talking about your problems and sort of acknowledging that your things are hard and that is a bit indulgent, you know? And I think the generation of teenagers and people in their 20s now, that's seen as a necessity because, like, in a good way, like it's seen as, no, it's really important to actually to be self-aware and to look after ourselves and to share our problems with our friends, and that this is an important thing. This is not a luxury. This is not an indulgence. This is sustenance. We need to do this, and I think that's what the shift is. I think I often think about this actually because my parents' generation were the sort of first generation of post-war children. So my granddad was in the war and stuff like that. So there's this sort of emotional hangover, and I think, and there's like this sort of like cultural thing about like, well, actually, people did have less choice then, and people did have to work shitty jobs to put bread on the table much more than they do now, broadly speaking. I know that's a very nuanced thing, but broadly
Mhm.
speaking, it was more common for people to be working 6 days and all that, and so actually, like having time to like the luxury of time wasn't common. And I think that's one of the changes of the sort of the time we're in, that people, that doesn't feel like a luxury, that feels like an important thing of self-care, maintenance, whatever you would call it, that's become more normalized. It's still not completely across the board, but more normalized, therefore it's not a big deal in a sense. And I think that's great. I think it's really like encouraging, because if I look at people in my parents' generation, like I can think of a handful of people in my extended family who, without being unkind, but would really benefit from talking to someone just in general, like having space for them to like go, do you know what? Sometimes stuff's hard, and
Absolutely.
and it's seen as a maybe a luxury or an indulgence.
Yes, yes. And yeah, I really resonate with that. And I'm working on a bit of another podcast about loneliness and
Mm,
disconnection to ourself.
mm,
And like you're describing there, that if we go our whole life not fully understanding and connecting with our true self, there can be some sort of disconnect. And
mm,
there's lots of reasons for that. And like you said, space and time and our perception on getting to know ourselves and all that kind of stuff. But there's an ache or a loneliness or a yearning inside us to understand who we truly are. Sometimes we push that down to, like Abernathy talks about, we push down authenticity for connection. So
mhm,
if we're driving for a sense of belonging and a community and connection with our caregivers or peers, we sometimes mask or put layers on who we truly are, and
mhm,
we maybe are never then gifted the time to look at those layers and maybe unpack them and unravel them and figure out who we truly are, and then
mhm.
make authentic connections based on that. And I
Yeah.
heard your journey of becoming a therapist and figuring out that and figuring out who you are through the process, and then almost having maintenance of that connection
Mm,
through
yeah.
your work,
Hmm.
through being a therapist. And I think that kind of gears us on to the last couple of questions I had. I seen a post of yours recently about fun. And I think
Mm,
it's such a powerful, often under talked about side effect of self-awareness, discovery of yourself therapy is it's not always about unraveling the pain. It's actually about gifting yourself more space and time to have ease and presence and fun. And I
mm-hmm.
just wanted to share, yeah, celebrations towards that message and
I
hear.
mean, I think that's a really important thing. Um, because it's like I talked about sustenance there, and like the young people like talking about the stuff that's going on for them is it almost feels like sustenance. It feels like you need to do it, and I think fun is often viewed as again a luxury or an indulgence or it's not a necessity, but actually, it's like what's it all for? I sometimes ask myself that very question, like when I'm if I'm getting caught up in stuff and like what's it all for? It's like it's we can't be having fun all day every day practically. We need a balance, but allowing yourself the space for fun, even to prioritize, even to timetable fun, which sounds silly perhaps, but actually going, right, you know what, 2 o'clock on Tuesday I'm going to flip out and jump about on a trampoline for a couple of hours. It's like that's so important
Mhm.
to and again I know that comes with a sort of a privilege to be able to do that. Like I'm very aware of that, but I think um, the idea of balance, fun is a central component to that. And I think for me, certainly since becoming a parent, like me and Ashley have always had fun. That's been a sort of central thing to our relationship. Is a lot of laughter, a lot of nonsense, a lot of silliness, and that's life affirming. That's enriching. I
Mhm.
think since becoming a parent, that's escalated. So, and I think even the way I work with clients feels like, yes, we're talking about really serious stuff. There's great reverence there, there's great care, but also therapy can be fun. Therapy can have laughter in it, and I think that it's sort of like, yeah, treating fun as a sort of luxury or an indulgence rather than just an essential thing. It's
Yeah.
sort of creating a hierarchy where it's like, oh, it's down there. I'll get to that later. I'll have fun on my holiday. It's like, no, you can just allow yourself space to have a bit more fun, to
Yes.
like
Yeah.
kick back or whatever you need to do.
That's
Yeah.
it. And we postpone some of that, like you
Mm-hmm.
said, for like adult responsibilities or what we assume we
Mm-hmm.
should be doing and all that kind of stuff. And you often hear, which is a really sad transition, that parents begin to realize the need for that in themselves when they become parents.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, they've recognized that they've missed that need within them. Even the like curiosity. And I think that's the joy of being outdoors, is that it for me brings out that creativity and curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
Like I love thinking about what is that mushroom and what is it
Yeah,
for?
yeah,
And
yeah.
like I'm always
Mm-hmm.
exploring that and
Mm-hmm.
connecting with clients and be like, oh, do you see that? Like a wee ladybug,
Mm-hmm.
or just being like paying attention, being in tune with our environment. And sometimes it can pass us by because we're deep in conversation and then we just come out for a breath and we're like, where are we? What are we
Hmm.
looking at? And that happens.
Hmm.
Like I've done long distance hikes in the past as well, and
Hmm.
love it. I try and do one every year or every couple of years, and we always meet people along the way and connect with this kind of like human to human.
Hmm.
You're both in the rhythms of nature, and you end up having like the deepest, like I mentioned earlier, the deepest conversations, and you're so just like alive. It's an aliveness, and it's a fun, and it's a kind of like jumping, and you end up doing kind of childlike things when you're in nature quite
Yeah.
naturally,
Hmm.
like it's quite it kind of encourages that energy
Yeah.
depending on where you are and who you're with, but there is moments of and glimpses of that more so than you would get in a room
Hmm.
when you're just
Yeah.
chatting to someone, and like you said, there's benefits. I'm not demonizing one better than the other or
No, no, of
anything like that,
course.
but it's highlighting that there is this other thing that exists, you know?
Hmm.
And so last two questions I had, one
Hmm.
of them is you mentioned that it's called walk and talk therapy now. That's become the familiar
Yeah.
concept. What's your preferred name for your work?
And just outdoor therapy. I
Outdoor
think that's
therapy.
a nice umbrella term. I think it's really it fits. I think walk and talk never felt like something that would fit for what I do. I never called it walk and talk. When I started, walk and talk wasn't, a thing that was commonplace. So I just called it outdoor therapy because that's what I think it is. And then walk and talks kind of became quite popular. I think the reason walk and talk's popular is for a start, it rhymes, it's catchy, people like stuff
Yeah.
like that. I think but I don't. I just never felt accurate. I don't always walk and talk with clients. It's a bit ableist. There's all sorts of stuff there that just doesn't feel like that's what it is. So it's therapy outdoors, outdoor therapy. I'm an outdoor therapist.
Right.
Whether that means sitting, standing, walking, whatever, but it's outdoors. And that's the key point. Um, so yeah, I just think walk and talk is it's really good that more people are offering that kind of stuff. It's really interesting and really like valid. But I think it became kind of almost like a trend during COVID times. It's like that's a way people could engage with therapy, which is a really useful thing. But I think it doesn't. It's never felt like, and I'm really resistant to that terminology for what I do. I'm like, no, that's not. That's not. So I try and always make that distinction. Like on one of the websites where I could list my services, they had a box that said walk and talk, and I was like, I don't want to tick that because it doesn't feel like. And then I had a box where you could tick other, and then I just wrote outdoor therapy because like I'm not. So yeah, that's so yeah, outdoor therapy or outdoor therapist
Yeah.
is kind of what feels right.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. And like
Hmm.
you said, it gives such a broader image of what that could be, sitting,
Hmm.
walking, being, but it's the nature of being outdoors rather than
Hmm.
like walk and talk specifically sounds like you're talking and you're walking. It
Yeah.
doesn't invite you to think about it in a
Sometimes
different
I do neither. Yeah. Sometimes we're sitting in silence.
way.
So it's
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
what's that then? You know?
Totally. I just wanted to check in with you about that. I agree, and I knew that you were going to say that, but it's still nice to reaffirm
Hmm.
what that is for you. And so the last question that I kind of end
Hmm.
when I plan to end session,
Yeah.
I was going to say sessions there, podcasts with,
Yeah.
is yeah, is there anyone that's been, and this can be someone we don't know or someone we know that's been influential in your journey or is consistently influential in your journey? Someone you listen to, someone you've read,
Mm.
anyone that you would kind of encourage someone else to tune into? Yeah. Did anyone come up when you thought of that question?
To be honest, I really struggled with that question.
Oh, cool.
I know there doesn't need to be an answer, but I really thought about that, in terms of, I suppose, influences and sort of, I think, and I'm trying to be mindful about how I say this, but I think I I think because I was so certain about what I wanted to do, once I figured out what that was, it's almost like I was like I'm really interested in, I don't know, go into that, but I'm really interested in lots of different people and their work and stuff. But I think it was like, yeah, I feel like I was doing my own thing. So it's almost like I don't know, like I never really felt like there was an external influence I was aware of or a person I looked up to. I couldn't think of anything like that.
Yep.
I think in terms of like how I've been guided to this point, I think Ashley's been a really powerful and positive influence in that. Just unwavering support, but also like cheerleading all the time. Of course you can do it. It's just like there's times I probably need that, times I probably don't need it, but it's still great to have it. Like so that's so nice. in terms of like work, like I think I'm more interested in, because there's not a lot of therapists doing this stuff, at this moment in time. I done some reading quite a few years ago, like about Haley Marshall and Martin Jordan, who Martin Jordan passed away like I don't know, 10 years ago or something, but they've both written like research papers and books and stuff, which is really interesting. And I'll dip in and out of those, and I find those really useful for like understanding, I guess, the process of what's going on when we're a client and like understanding how we all relate to the environment and all that. So that's probably like a useful thing that I revisit. But in terms of the work, I find this a bit awkward to say this, but I feel like what's happened is, after 29 years of like looking for a bit loads of validation and loads of connection, and there's like, this thing your t-shirt says, it's like when I started doing this, I feel like I came home. And it's like, so I am more than willing to collaborate and be influenced and by other people, and I really love all that stuff. But I feel like this is about me finding the thing that's important to me and being able to share that. And I think that's what it is. It's like there's numerous and countless people who've probably influenced that. Of course there is, but I can't single out people and go like, oh, they were a big influence or they were a big help, other than the sort of friendships and sort of loved ones that have kind of been like, of course you can do that,
Yes.
So I think for me a lot it's been about that, just support, feeling supported and making decisions, and for those decisions to be treated with reverence and belief, and like, of course you can do that, and I think that's been a huge catalyst for that for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And that doesn't, you said you felt a wee bit awkward around that. I feel that that's a real, it should be celebrated to have that belief in yourself and have that nurtured by other people. But at
Hmm.
the same time, that strong trust within
Hmm.
yourself at a perfect point in your life where you were ready for it, and that ready to
Hmm.
take that forward. Um, and I guess the kind of behind the scenes of that question was, I was asking Villiers about this. I was thinking, like, I don't know how I would describe how I got to where I am,
Mm.
because it's such a combination of
Yeah.
so many different things that
Hmm.
it's not anything. It's part of the course and the journey I was on, learning, but
Hmm.
there's so many other things in my personal life that happened. It's like a perfect storm of lots of different things.
Hmm.
So it's really, really difficult to explain how I got to where I am as a counselor.
Hmm.
And it would be so hard to replicate because there's so many influences as well as myself, but there's so many podcasts and like so many reading,
Yeah.
like such a whirlwind of different things that,
Hmm.
like you said, it's hard to unpack one specific thing of influence. And so I don't know how I would answer the question either.
Yeah.
And maybe last like thing, is there any podcast or anyone that you listen to that you regularly tune into, or do you not have space in your life right now to even do that?
Well, do you know, it's one of the things I used to do if I had a day where I had loads of outdoor clients, those moments in between clients, I would probably go for a wander and listen to a podcast or go and have a coffee and listen to it. But just at the turn of the year, like there's been a shift again, and I don't know, it's probably a response to where I am, but I've just stopped listening to stuff. Like I've
Mm.
actually occasionally I'll listen to a podcast if I'm driving or something, but actually those are not therapy related. There's one about cliches and football cliches. So there's like it's like an escapism thing, it's
Yeah.
not about but what I've started doing since the turn of the year pretty much is if I have a day where it's all outdoor clients, and I always leave myself a 30-minute buffer in between clients because that's important. And if I timetable my day in such a way, sometimes I have an hour and a half in the middle of the day in between clients, I go for a wander into the woods, don't listen to anything, just go. And like that's become like a real fixture for me. This week's the first week I've not done that in a while, and I'm feeling that. I mean, I've got outdoor clients on Thursday and Friday, but I'm feeling I've not had that sort of unstructured outdoor time that's been really valuable. I've had time outside with the family, been at the park and stuff like that. But like last week and the week before, I managed to do that 2 or 3 times each week. And like I think it was one day I had 2 hours in between clients because someone cancelled, and I was like, well, that's or rearranged. I was like, oh, that's great. So I wandered up into the woods, took my camping chair, took a flask of tea and a book, and I ended up sitting in the middle of nowhere. Don't know how I got to that bit because I'd never went that way before. I just sat there for like with the intention of reading a book. Didn't read the book, just sort of sat and like listened to the birds and sort of had like a 10-minute power nap, I think.
Oh, lovely.
So that's become my sort of, a thing that I'm making more space for that. And I love listening to podcasts and music, but I think I'm enjoying the unstructured and there's something about the podcast listening as well that if I find something I like, I'm really dedicated to listening to it and I really enjoy it. But I think I'm enjoying my time not being sort of structured and sort of a timetabled. It's like, oh, I've got, I can listen to a podcast episode now. I've got time. It's more
Yes.
like, oh, I've got free time. I'll go and play in the woods. I'll go and climb a tree.
Totally, with your mind free,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we have so much coming in,
Mm-hmm.
especially as therapists. We're listening to stories, we're listening to perceptions, we're
Mm-hmm.
always kind of taking in. So
Mm-hmm.
just to have that freedom and space to ebb and flow and just be still or hang out or have fun in the woods yourself. That's it. And last, just to end there, is like what a lovely place you get to work. When
Yeah.
I was thinking about an idea of some kind of aspirations as a therapist. I was kind of dream boarding,
Yeah.
and this was about 2 or 3 weeks before I seen exactly where you were working, because I now
Mm,
know like where that is because we were downstairs and then around that area. I was like, that's it. It's having a space where you can fluctuate between
mm-hmm.
indoors and outdoors, and it's so nurturing and beautiful. And it was just so cool that you get to work
Mm.
there with clients and be there for you, and have that
Well,
space.
yeah. I mean, I think that is it. It's like that was something that came about, and again, it was one of those moments in my life which it feels like I've had a lot when I'm talking about it, but a moment where there was no doubt. I saw it advertised on Instagram, and within about half an hour, I'd secured it without even going to see it pretty much. Well, I mean, I went to see it previously for other reasons, but I was just like, I'll take it. There's just no doubt. It's like, of course, longer term. I mean, I tend to dream big. Longer term, I want to have my own place. I want to have some sort of outdoor therapy training place. I want to have like a woodland, some accommodation. That's eventually what I want to have. Don't know where that'll be, when that'll be, but I believe it'll happen.
Yeah,
And I think that's a big part of the thing I'm getting joy out of is doing something a bit different, is being able to share that with people, not just clients, like being able to go like, like this is possible. It's actually really possible and it's really within reach. And the stuff that, for example, lecturers are saying is about them. So actually you can do this. It's not like a million miles off.
yeah.
So there is an element of a leap of faith, there's an element of guidance and stuff. So that's kind of, I see me doing more of that stuff as well, which I really love. So
That's lovely to end on where you're kind of hoping to go in the future. And like we mentioned at the start, hopefully we get to do this again. And
yeah,
when
cool, eh?
things ease for both of us, we can be outdoors. And I'll definitely come to you because that feels like a really nice place to
That'd be fun, yeah.